Welcome, everyone. I'm Sharon Ryan, Chair of Legislation and Resolution with CWL at Holy Family Parish in St. Albert, Alberta, Canada. And today, pleased to welcome Honorable Michael Cooper, our Member of Parliament for St. Albert and Edmonton. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Sharon.
Well, thank you for joining us today. Our topic today is where euthanasia is at in Canada. Michael has been very much involved in the euthanasia topics at the governmental level in Canada. And I'm just going to let Michael explain to us where we're at with this topic.
Well, Sharon, there have been some major changes in the medical assistance in dying regime over the last year and a half since the Quebec Superior Court issued the Truchon decision in the fall of 2019. That was a Quebec Superior Court decision that found that the criterion that death be reasonably foreseeable was unconstitutional. And so that delinked the end of life context to medical assistance in dying, which is a major change and removes one of the key safeguards that was passed as part of Bill C-14, which was Parliament's legislative response to the Carter decision, the Supreme Court Carter decision that struck down the blanket criminal code prohibition on medical assistance in dying. Now, it was my position, it was the position of Conservatives in the fall of 2019 that the Attorney General, whose responsibility it is to uphold the laws of Canada, ought to have appealed the decision. After all, this was a major safeguard passed in legislation that had been debated and voted on in Parliament a mere 3 years prior to the Truchon decision. That would have provided clarity in the law by, if necessary, going all the way to the Supreme Court, and it would have given Parliament time to respond legislatively. Unfortunately, the Attorney General didn't do that. Rather, in a rushed approach, the Attorney General introduced Bill C-7, which is currently before Parliament, that removes that death be reasonably foreseeable from the medical assistance in dying regime. But not only does it remove that key safeguard, it actually goes well beyond the scope of the Carter decision by removing other common sense safeguards that were provided for in Bill C-14, such as a 10-day reflection period, so that when one makes a request currently, they must have at least 10 days to make a final decision on a question of life and death. Under Bill C-7, you could have, in certain circumstances, same-day death where there is no reflection. Additionally, the legislation removes the requirement that there be two witnesses to someone making a request. When one executes a will, it's necessary to have two witnesses. One would think that when we're talking about medical assistance in dying, that we would surely have as robust safeguards as that of executing a will. But here under this legislation, we would have a lesser safeguard. And not only removing two witnesses, it removes the requirement that there be two independent witnesses. So you could now have medical professionals attending to a person's care who could, in fact, be a witness. Now, that raises a whole lot of questions around conflict of interest, around coercion, however unintended, just having regard for the power imbalance that exists between a patient and a medical health professional. So there's a lot of issues with Bill C-7, and it's why there's been enormous opposition to it from the disabilities rights community, from the palliative care community, and from more than 1,100 physicians who have penned a letter opposing the legislation.
It seems the most troubling aspect of it is that now anyone whose death is not reasonably foreseeable, but perhaps walks into an emergency room and is suddenly diagnosed with a condition, not necessarily a life-threatening condition, can actually request euthanasia. And I imagine this is going to create extreme stress for the emergency room doctors. Michael, I know you've consulted with a lot of doctors. What are they saying?
They're very concerned about this legislation. And when you remove the reasonably foreseeable criteria, all that is left in order to qualify is that one must have a disease or illness in which they are in a state of decline, in which they are suffering either physically or psychologically. Now, that is a very subjective set of criteria. And one of the key concerns that have by physicians is the subjectivity of the criteria. Additionally, there are concerns about the time that would be provided for where death is not reasonably foreseeable under Bill C7. Where death is reasonably foreseeable, there will be no reflection period. Same-day death could be provided for, which is hugely problematic. But where death is not reasonably foreseeable, the legislation provides that there could be only a 90-day period, a minimum of 90 days to reflect upon the decision. Why is that problematic? Well, I mean, first of all, 90 days is not a long time, especially if someone has some condition in terms of which their life has been changed, whereby they meet that criteria. Sometimes when you go through those life-changing events, people have suicidal thoughts. And in order to make a truly informed choice, in order to truly consent, one needs to have the opportunity to have a lived experience. And that means having the ability to access palliative care, the ability to access other supports. And 90 days certainly doesn't provide an opportunity for meaningful palliative care. In many instances, it's not even possible to get key supports within the period of 90 days. So that is also problematic, and that was flagged by many medical health professionals who have voiced opposition.
Indeed, the lack of reflection period seems to be an obvious defect in this bill. Anyone who's gone through any kind of medical crisis of any nature knows that when you first learn the news that you have a condition, it's very shocking in the first few days, few hours, and even few months, and it can take years for a person to heal from that. But many of us know that through time we can learn to cope with it and even go on to live a very happy and fulfilling life. And so it seems to me that the lack of reflection period is a serious flaw in this bill. Now, what can we do at this point? Where are we at with this bill, and what can we do to stop it?
Right now, the bill is before the Senate. It passed in the House of Commons, and in the Senate, there was a pre-study before the bill got to the Senate, in which there were 81 witnesses who appeared before the Senate Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee. The only witness who endorsed the bill was the Attorney General himself, who introduced the bill. Literally every witness who appeared before the Senate, other than the Attorney General, expressed opposition to the bill. That's how flawed this piece of legislation is. No one is happy about it whatsoever. So we'll see what happens in the Senate. It may not pass the Senate, which would be really quite uncharted territory for a government bill not to pass the Senate. It has happened before, but it's extremely rare. More likely than that, it will be amended. What those amendments look like, it remains to be seen. But I do want to stress, one of the groups or segments of society that have expressed very strong opposition to this bill is the disabilities rights. 72 disabilities rights organizations wrote to the minister back when Prushan was rendered, pleading with the minister to appeal the decision. Those pleas fell on deaf ears. This legislation discriminates against persons with disabilities, and it renders it such that someone who simply has a degenerative disability could qualify for medical assistance in dying. And what the disabilities rights community has been saying is that this legislation promotes ableism, that it sends the message that living with a disability is worse than death. And that is very, very, frankly, troubling. And not only has it been national disabilities rights groups that have expressed opposition, it actually has received international attention. The UN Special Rapporteur on the rights of persons with disabilities has called into question whether Canada is fulfilling its international obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, including Article 10 of that convention, which provides that persons with disabilities should be treated equally under the law. And here they're clearly not, because someone could literally qualify for medical assistance in dying for no other reason than the fact that they happen to be disabled.
Absolutely. And you know, Michael, as a Catholic, I oppose not only Bill C-7, but the previous Bill C-14. I oppose euthanasia, and most Catholics do. And the reason for that is because euthanasia itself is a grave violation of the law of God. One of the commandments says, "Thou shalt not kill," period. Life is valuable in and of itself and is not dependent on how full one's life is. If we're to sit here and start judging how full one's life is, starting with the disabled, starting with those who are in the final days and weeks of their month, what is stopping us in the future from judging that a middle-class person walking down the street does not have as full a life as a billionaire, and therefore we should, you know, do away with low-class and middle economic class people? So I think that it's full of problems. And, you know, I just like to conclude by saying, you know, Christians believe that God is love, and God is also unconditional love. And anyone who has been in the presence of someone who's very vulnerable, somebody who is severely disabled or in the process of dying, is completely dependent on us for everything. And to be with that person and care for that person and love that person, even though they can give us nothing in return, is a rich experience of understanding what unconditional love really means. And it's actually a grace and a blessing to be in that situation. And we should be nurturing those people, not encouraging them to die sooner. So anyway, Michael, I just want to thank you so much for your time today, and good luck with killing Bill C-7, and let us know if there's anything we can do to help you.
Well, thank you very much, Sharon. This is really an important issue, and I hope more Canadians get engaged in, because this legislation does put vulnerable persons at risk, and that should concern every Canadian of goodwill.
Thank you, Michael.